This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. Welcome to the Craft Beer Brewing Podcast. I'm Jamie Bogner, and this special episode focusing on process aids is brought to you interruption-free by RAR BSG, the industry leader that supplies breweries big and small across North America with the very best ingredients and brewing supplies. Process aids are not the sexiest of brewing subjects, but whether your goal is more efficient brewhouse and cellar utilization, brewer safety, clearer beer, or even reduced inefficiency and waste, they're essential tools in any size production environment. Over the course of this episode, we'll talk about everything from kettle finings and anti-foaming agents to mash and fermentation enzymes, tank finings, and more. Joining me for the conversation are Steve Theoritis, head brewer for Zero Gravity in Burlington, Vermont. Welcome to the podcast, Steve.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
Also joining me once again is Sam Pecoraro of Von Ebert in Portland, Oregon. Welcome back again, Sam.
Yep. Thanks for having me, Jamie. Nice to be on here and not have the most difficult last name to pronounce.
Sure. And Ashton Lewis of RAR BSG. Welcome back again, Ashton. Always a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you, Jamie. Great to be here.
Ashton and I spent some time together a few months ago at our brewers retreat in Asheville and Mills River, North Carolina. And now here we are, talking about process aids. Let's kick things off with a little bit of background before we get to the topic at hand. And why don't you start, Steve, with a little bit about Zero Gravity and a little bit about you?
Sure, thank you. Zero Gravity, founded in 2004 as a small brew pub here in Little Burlington, Vermont. In 2015, we expanded into this bigger production facility over here on Pine Street, which is the south end of town. And then in 2020, we grew even further as we were bursting at the seams here and moved into the old Magic App plant in South Burlington, which is about 10 minutes away. As a brewery, we make about 47,000 barrels a year, mixed styles. As much as we love lager over here, we do make a fair amount of New England IPA, and then the appropriate dark beer. I'm enjoying our Schwartz right now. Cheers to you all. As seasonally appropriate. So.
Nice. Sam, why don't you give us a little bit of background on you and on Von Ebert?
Yeah. Von Ebert's about to celebrate our 8th anniversary here in April. I've gone through a lot of changes in those 8 years. I've started here in 2018 when we opened up. We were a small brew pub down in the Pearl District. Opened up a second facility, a little bit smaller, out on the Glendevere Golf Course here in Portland, and grew the company to around 4,000 barrels and kind of outran our two pub locations. And at the beginning of 2024, moved into the former production facility for Ecliptic Brewing. Went through about a year and a half of renovations there, and we're now at about 10,000 barrel pace, and have capacity for around 20,000, so quite a bit smaller than Steve. I got my start here in Portland. I've only brewed at Portland breweries. Started in 2010 at Fernside Brewing. Worked at the Commons Brewery making a thing called Saison. And then went and worked for Breakside Brewing and moved over here. And I've now the brewmaster here, and we've got quite a bit bigger crew, and we tend to concentrate on German-inspired lagers and West Coast and American IPAs.
Good stuff, and quite a bit of metals and hardware to show for all of that great work. Ashton, give us a little bit of background on you and BSG.
Yeah, so I'm Ashton Lewis. I'm the technical product manager for RAR BSG. Been with the company for just a couple months, over 9 years, but I've been in the industry for over 30. Started homebrewing back in 1986, I think, and I just really love the beer industry. But I work for a company that we're about 20 years old now, BSG, RAR BSG. But RAR is 179 years old, so we've been around for a while, and the thing that I like to tell people is that at RBSG, we provide breweries everything needed to make beer but water. And, we don't have hardware. And the thing that makes us happy is when we see our customers pulling down hardware at beer competitions in the US and Canada and other parts of the world. So great to be here with Steve and Sam today. And you.
Sure. Well, then broadly, get us started what we're talking about today. As we were brainstorming what to focus on, this concept of process aids became kind of a driving factor. And again, one of the nice things we are able to do here on the podcast is get wonky in a way that only brewers truly care about. Talking about the things that may bore some other people to tears, but the absolute details. And, as we all know, the details in brewing are what make the difference. A great lager or a great IPA isn't just one magic ingredient that's going to make it. It's 100 small things. It's a great recipe, and then all of the things that you use along the way, to take care of that beer, to treat it gently, and to get the best out of it, protect it at every one of those steps. And so the idea of this conversation about process aids is driven by that, right? About protecting and keeping that beer in the best shape that we possibly can as we go through it.
Yeah. So the way I look at process aids is the process aids are one of the things that I'm going to try to make this sexy. It's the good to great factor. It's the sauce that makes stuff happen. And we can say good to great in terms of flavor. We can talk about good to great in terms of stability. We can think good to great in terms of safety. And then a topic today, and I think Steve and Sam can probably talk to this much better than I can ever, is the idea of running a brewery that's profitable. So efficiencies and just all of the financial stuff that goes into running a brewery these days, all of that's affected by process aid. I don't call it the good to great sauce.
Sure. So, Steve, greatness is, what percentage inspiration and what percentage perspiration? How much, time in your process, do you spend, say, working on a great recipe versus dialing in all of the kind of production processes all along the way to make sure that that beer is ultimately as good as it possibly can be? How do you balance that at the scale that you're at?
If I was lucky, I'm spending 5% working on recipe design, if I'm being completely honest. So much of it is process execution, and the fine details really matter. So process aids, technique, temperature, are we pitching exactly what we think we are? Our O2 levels just right. That's the difference between good and great. We've got some great recipes over here, and we've seen them improve over the years, and we've seen some very well executed beers suffer from being a tiny bit off. And your pitch right here, your O2 there, and those are the details that I spend 95% of my time on.
Sure. And Sam, for you, with West Coast IPA, with German style lagers, there is a fineness that's necessary there, a vibrancy and a brightness that you need to maintain, and dialing in that process is absolutely key to making sure that those beers, when they go to the World Beer Cup or GABF medal table, are the absolute best and are going to shine in that sense. So I assume you spend a lot of time working on some of this process, at least as much time as the recipes themselves.
Oh yeah, I'm with Steve on that one. That's probably about accurate. I would say 5% is probably the breakdown on, and most of that's just really checking inputs, right? I mean, I guess you could include hop selection there, could include looking at alt COAs, sieve analysis, making sure that all your inputs are consistent. You don't have any red flags there. But yeah, the other 95% is absolutely just process driven. We'll throw healthy fermentation into that bucket as well. Like if you don't have a great healthy fermentation, probably nothing else really matters. Yeah, I think Steve's 95.5 is probably spot on.
So even though it may not be the sexiest of subjects on the top level surface, it becomes a focus for you all. And, of course, that's why we can kind of get deeper into this now. What do you want to start with Ashton? Should we start talking about kettle findings first on the hot side? And, there's some idea behind Irish moss and the science behind it. Do you want to shed a little light on kettle findings and, talk about how we can kind of get into how they practically are used at a production scale brew house in a minute.
Sure. I mean, just a real, top level review. I think kettle findings are interesting because if you come from the English tradition of brewing, kettle findings are quite common, sometimes called copper findings, because the English brewing tradition allows for that. But if you're from a German brewing tradition, the Reinheitsgebot doesn't allow for the use of kettle findings. The real advantage of using kettle findings that are from either Irish moss, which is a specific type of seaweed, if you will, or other like Condus crispus is Irish moss, and then Yakima cottony is farm raised as seagrass from the Philippines, mainly is where it's grown. The real advantage of that is we're removing some protein from the wort, we're removing some lipid from wort. So it's all related to kind of downstream clarity and stability. And that's really the advantage of using kettle findings is better stability downstream. But it's something that'll, some brewers use and some brewers don't. And the other component that's often overlooked with kettle findings, probably overlooked because we don't filter as much beer today as we used to. But if you do filter through a depth filter, whether that's DE or a sheet, you get better filter throughput if you're using kettle findings in the brew house.
Sure. Steve or Sam, how do kettle findings find their way into the beers that you all make? Do you use them if you find some functional utility around that? Removing material before, creating good-looking, clear wort is super important. So you want to create the best wort that you possibly can.
So they're a regular feature in all of our beer, lagers, IPAs, everything. We are probably just shy of obsessive of making sure we get as much cold break out of our tanks as possible. And the Whirlfloc G that we use really helps facilitate that. Although I have to admit, in doing a little bit of homework before the lead up to this conversation, I delved into some of the backgrounds on Whirlfloc G specifically and came across a note or suggestion from Ashton that you vary your dose from style to style by gravity, and then even malt year or crop year to crop year with your malt. And that's something that we are not doing at the moment. So I'm learning as we go here too.
Sam, you've got an involved process with kettle findings. Why don't you school us on the Von Ebert approach?
Jamie, I would prefer to not have an involved process, but what we've gone through in the last 2 years is quite a long story. So a little background. We have put almost all of our core brands through at least 4 brew houses over the last 2 years. And, that went from basically 1 brew house to 4 brew houses. Now we're down to 2 brew houses. And we sort of, I'll just call us out and say we got a little lazy and just translated some of the previous usage rates. Like Steve said, we apply kettle findings to all of our brands, ES Juice, Whirlfloc G. Well, that didn't translate very well. Our new 5-vessel 30-barrel brew house at our Mississippi location, we're having a lot of issues, a lot of yield loss, hot side, wort that did not, look up to clarity standards, and then lost its downstream. And we had a good friend of the brewery help us out recently, kind of took a look at all of our process and our usage rates. And it turns out our usage rates were, we were making a few mistakes. I like when people are on this podcast and they're like, I made mistakes. So I'm gonna be that guy right now. Hopefully people appreciate that. Don't think I'm completely lost here.
No, Sam, we all know how great you are, and I can personally attest to how great your beers are. But but that's the whole thing, right? Let's share, and we can all learn from your mistakes, hopefully without making more of them ourselves. And so we appreciate that honesty from you on this.
Great. Okay, so everybody listening, don't do what we did. Number one, we were adding Galatamin at the same time that we were adding Whirlfloc. That was creating some issues. We separated those by about 5 minutes. We were severely under our Whirlfloc optimum usage rate. Adjusted that. The third issue that our good friend found was we kind of just dialed it in on transfer rate to the whirlpool and never checked our premises there. We were moving over about 2.5 x the targeted speed. I think Ashton probably knows this off the top of my head, but it's like, I don't know, 2.5 to 4 meters per second or something like that. We were moving over at about 10. So I think we were not setting ourselves up timing wise, not setting ourselves up rate wise, and then also moving over at too quick of a speed to the whirlpool. So, what that did was basically not set us up for success and ruin everything downstream, both yield and clarity. We discovered all this pretty recently. This was only maybe about 2 months ago that we started making these process changes, and have immediately seen clarity and yield improvements. So, honestly, the only excuse is quick growth and, lots of other things going on, but lesson learned. And luckily there's very smart people out there that, can help get an eye on things for you.
Well, just a quick question, actually, for either Ashton or Sam. I'm just wondering if one of you guys wouldn't mind shedding a little light on how transfer speeds are going to impact the WorldFlock effectiveness.
I'll say something that Sam, please follow up. I mean, in general on that, Steve, it's basically shear damage caused by turbulent flow, turbulence, and also the shear as the wort flows through the nozzle that enters the whirlpool vessel. So that in general will take large flocks of truth and break them up into smaller pieces. It's kind of interesting. The kettle findings that are used, whether it's Irish moss or more purified form like the or the Yakima cottony, which is what WorldFlock is, we get bigger flocks of true, but the real effect of the kettle finding is on cold trube formation, that those big true particles that form in the kettle are broken down. And that's true whether you're using kettle findings or not. And now problem is not just nozzle size and fluid velocity to the transfer pipe, but you like T's and elbows in the pipe system. It can really cause a lot of that shear. And then it can be really difficult to get that out. John Mallett did a really, really good paper probably 20 years ago, wrote a good paper. And he had eliminated some of the things that Bell's and one of their smaller brew houses that was leading to shear, and really was able to demonstrate how I cleaned up the piping system and really focusing on what Sam was mentioning about velocity can really have a marked effect on true separation in the whirlpool.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Ashton, do you want to talk a little bit about, this optimizing for crop year of your malt and, say adjusting the dosage rate depending on wort gravity?
Yeah, and I want to start out by commenting on what Steve said before. It's really easy for suppliers to sit back and say, okay, brewers, you need to do this, because it's a pain in the ass. I mean, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it, but there's the brand issue. So the brand issue is the original gravity and also the composition of the grist. The different grist are going to have different protein levels. So if you have similar brands, if you have, let's say you're making, West Coast IPAs and New England style IPAs that fall into a similar, let's say, wort gravity and grist composition, you might say, well, we're going to use, a dosing rate for this type of beer and then another dosing rate for Helles Lager and Pilsner Lager. But the real thing is the wort gravity, the hopping rate, the specialty malts, and then the real important thing is the crop year. So whenever you know that there's a new crop year, I mean, right now we're recording this February 18th, 2026. A lot of brewers are just getting into 2025 crop year malted barley. And with new crop years, particularly we know about changes in protein, that's a really, really good time to do an optimization. So some breweries, we tell them, at a minimum, we'd like to see our customers do optimizations annually. If you're changing your malt supplies or doing things that you might see more fluctuation within a year, you might want to do it quarterly.
Do you have a calculator for that, Ashton, or is there a spreadsheet formula? Like,
we have a calculator to get people in the ballpark, but the way you do it is you take a wort sample, you dose it with a solution of your finding, and then you cool it down and you observe how much truth is formed during the period of the test. It's a pain in the neck. No nice way to put it.
So it's an actual practical test that that's going to pretty much be required to see how it works in real practice and not just in mathematical theory.
Right. It's a great thing for new brewers to, assign that to the new brewers.
Sure. I'm sure they love that. Yeah. Let's pivot and talk about anti-foaming agents. Throughout the whole brewing process, we understand that maintaining foam potential is kind of a key piece here. You also want to think about anti-foaming as a way of maintaining brewer safety. Particularly on the hot side, particularly with creating beers where that is that kind of potential for boil over. But at the end of it, if you start losing protein and things start coming out of solution, though that all becomes potential foam forming stuff that doesn't make it into your finished beer, and nobody wants a great lager that doesn't have a nice head of foam on it. So let's talk about anti-foaming agents from a perspective of like foam preservation and maintaining foam potential. Sam, why don't you kick this one off? With German style lager, obviously great foam is of key importance. What are some of the ways that you may be using anti-foaming agents through the brewing process to make sure that when that beer gets packaged, that it's going to come out with the best possible foam on it?
Yeah, I think as far as, we've always just used BSG Firm Cap AT. We've really just looked at it from more of a safety perspective. Our larger brew house has a high and a low boil over sensor, but we do still use Firm Cap when we're using that kettle, just as a backup, and also to just keep foam down and have consistent boil off. At our smaller brew house, it's same thing, no boil over sensors, but we do still use Firm Cap. Same thing, consistent boil, consistent foam on top of the boil. Downstream, we don't use anything. We don't use anything in either of the dedicated whirlpools or during fermentation. We have played around a little bit with some Firm Cap S and some anti-foams in fermentation, but haven't really seen anything definitive there. I know other people have had very different results trialing that, so I'm sure there's a lot of people listening that will correct you there. As far as lagers go, honestly, the key to great foam for us has always just been spoonding and making sure that we're coming out of the FV at full volumes per volume, not needing to hit it with any additional carbonation stone or in line. So pretty much never has a bubble going through it other than off gassing CO2 from fermentation, and then good keg filling and canning processes as well.
Sure. Steve, for you, how do the anti-foaming agents work their way into your process?
We use a hot side anti-foaming agent, basically echoing what Sam said, mostly in the name safety and preventing boilovers. We actually had a problem when we moved into the South Burlington plant where we were routinely getting boilovers, and our maintenance manager was really upset to learn that the roof had gotten some damage from continuous overflow. So boy, didn't we figure that out right quick. We actually use a vegetable oil-based anti-foam from one of our chemical suppliers. We just try to avoid silicone-based products at every turn. In terms of carbonation, really curious, whether or not we are preserving enough those hydrophobic beer proteins to kind of really encourage sustained head retention. Something that, like so many other things, I'm overdue to look into. And, circling back around to what Sam was saying about carbonation, especially in lager beer, we do spoon some of our beer. We also slow carb everything though through a rotometer. So tiny little bubbles going in really slowly. We're not blowing off anything out of our brights in an ideal world anyway.
Ashton, why don't you talk a little bit about the science behind anti-foaming agents and, starting on the hot side with kettle?
Well, the science is pretty straightforward. I mean, anti-foam is basically a hydrophobic compound that, causes foam to collapse. So they're not a whole lot different than wiping, touching your nose and sticking that in a beer glass, which I don't know who invented that that method of anti-foam, but that's pretty disgusting. But we all know that it's pretty effective. So that's what they are. They're hydrophobic liquids that can be added. The key with an anti-foam, though, is you want something that is going to be effective in the process that doesn't have any lasting effect on the beer. So in the kettle, it's safety is the number one reason. And the fermenter, not safety, but it's basically preventing loss of beer that goes down the drain with foam. So I would say that those are the two number one reasons for anti-foam. The secondary reason in the kettle and in the fermenter is the same, is loss of hop bittering compounds. Because with foam, you get the hydrophobic hop bittering compounds that stick to vessel walls. So we have better hop utilization in the kettle. We use anti-foam, and you have more hop as well as acid retention and fermentation when you use anti-foams. And then there's the retention of the foam positive things that you mentioned earlier is a reason for the use of anti-foams. And then the fourth kind of scientific, explanation about anti-foam is in the fermenter. And this one's interesting because it was something that 5 years ago, there'd be very few people that listen to this podcast and say, yeah, that resonates. But today, if you collect carbon dioxide, there's more and more breweries that are collecting CO2. You get a cleaner breakover of gas and your gas that comes off the fermenter with anti-foam. So if you don't use anti-foam, there's a blend of oxygen and CO2 that comes across. And if you have an anti-foam, you get a tighter breakover, which is good for CO2 recovery because those systems reject kind of, let's say, low purity CO2. And those are the kind of reasons you use them, and it's all based just upon the hydrophobicity of the anti-foam compound.
I sat in on a session with Dalem at the California Craft Beer Summit, where they talked about the system they installed at Russian River for CO2 recapture. And as you're saying, like, there is a whole chamber for collecting foam and separating out foam from gas. And, obviously the less foam you create, then the more efficient that entire process is. And, these days, even though, these systems are even available in smaller and smaller scales for breweries. And given that, the cost of CO2 and not just the cost, but the quality of CO2, the quality that you make as a brewer is actually some of the cleanest CO2 that will ever make its way into your brewery. And so finding ways to use that is certainly a good one.
Agreed. Yeah.
Yeah. Ashton, I'm curious, got a question for you. So we trialed a little bit of anti-foam, but really more for, I guess, kind of blow off control. When a large brewery that's doing CO2 recapture, what we experienced was that there was a half-life in fermentation where maybe that anti-foam worked well for 8 hours, and then at the 12th hour it kind of gave up and it was used up. I don't know, you can explain that a lot better than I can. But are they, from a practical standpoint, are they dosing it throughout fermentation?
Well, I would say that the most breweries that use anti-foams do not dose during fermentation, Sam, but that is definitely a way to do that. You can set it up on a dosing pump. You can measure foam in the headspace, and you can add more if it's needed. In fact, there's so much in beer and biopharmaceutical that we can learn from each other. But in a biopharmaceutical bioreactor, foaming is a problem in those vessels as well, and that oftentimes is how those anti-foams are used in biopharmaceutical fermentations, where they will, if the foam builds up too much, and they'll add more anti-foam in the process. So yeah, you could do that in a brewery. But then you kind of have to have a mechanism for doing that, and that's where a lot of the brewing processes are. Everything is not automated. So if you don't have the instrumentation and don't have the metering pumps and all that kind of stuff set up, then yes, it works, but in practice, it's difficult to really do that.
So talk to me about the mechanics of this, Ashton. I mean, this is something you obviously want this to drop out of the beer eventually, because there's a point where we want it, we want that foam, but it needs to serve and be effective and in solution in a way that accomplishes its goal. So how do you balance those two things? Keeping it in solution, especially on the cold side, keeping it in solution during fermentation, in a way that can be effective, but then also allowing that the time and mechanics and what are the mechanics about dropping that out of the beer so that by that end of that process, once your beer is packaged, that foam is going to gloriously return.
Well, that's the key, is having the foam gloriously return. So the anti-foams are inherently, they're surface active. They don't want to be in the beer. They want to be hanging out at the surface. They tend to be hydrophobic, so they're at the top of the fermenter. So in fermentation, if the anti-foam is lost, it's lost to something. So it can get lost to surfaces, whether that's the tank wall. Let's say you don't add enough anti-foam and you have some foam, then the foam will carry the anti-foam and stick it to the side of the tank. So in general, the way that it's removed is it will flocculate with yeast. So the anti-foam, especially if you have a yeast that top crops, it'll stick to the yeast and then it'll flocculate with the yeast, which is how, unless you're truly top cropping your yeast, that's where most of it is removed. But I always tell our customers, I don't feel comfortable with using anti-foam unless you're either centrifuging and or filtering or empirically determining that the anti-foam does not have any residual negative effect. So it is kind of an empirical thing. But for a lot of brewery, especially the larger breweries that are using anti-foams, they're typically using some type of depth filter, and the depth filter will definitely remove the anti-foam. But if you have residual anti-foam in beer, you'd know it because you would have foaming issues. The other thing I failed to mention about anti-foam is that it's an easy way to gain about 20% of capacity in your fermenter because of all the, most fermenters have about 33% headspace additional just for that foam. And by using an anti-foam, you can fill your fermenting vessel higher and get more tank utilization without having to, invest more in the cellar if you need more volume.
And everybody loves free tank space.
Yes.
For sure. Anything else on anti-foam, or should we, I guess next on our list of things to talk about are enzymes? Where do you want to start on enzymes, Ashton? Should we talk about, because this is a multifaceted kind of subject in terms of, different enzymes and what they're used for? Why don't you give us a brief overview?
Yeah, so the brief overview on enzymes that are used in the mash, I think really fall into three main buckets. The one bucket are enzymes that are used to drive wort fermentability, and amyloglucosidase is really kind of the textbook model of the enzyme that drives fermentability. So whether you're making a brut IPA, which if my memory serves correct, those were popular for maybe a couple months back, a few years ago.
Or making a light beer for that matter.
And that's the one that's returning, light beer. We see a lot of people talking about light beer. So amyloglucosidase is the enzyme for that. The other enzyme class that falls into mash enzymes are basically alpha amylase. So breaking down big starch molecules. And then the third bucket of enzymes would be cellulase enzymes. So beta glucanase and or arabinoxylenase type enzymes.
And explain what those are and what those do.
Sorry. The first one we talked about, light beer brut. The alpha amylase isn't really good if you're using adjuncts that are not gelatinized, and you want to take like corn or rice and break down the molecules a little bit and then let the malt enzymes take over. That's one reason why you use a exogenous alpha amylase. And then the cellulase enzymes, the beta glucanase, arabinoxylenase, which is oftentimes a mixture, those are used if you're using either undermodified malts or if you're using unmalted adjuncts like oats, rye, wheat, barley for hazies or whatever kind of beer, and you have wort separation problems in the water con. The cellulase enzymes can really help with the workflow through your grain bed.
Obviously, through the mash process, the whole point of mash conversion is to also release some of these enzymes naturally from that barley. I mean, that's what we love about it. It's why beer works, right? Because barley has some of these enzymes, but there are times when nature needs a little bit of help, and and some of these things help that mash along. Steve, how do enzymes fit into your mash process, and where have you found a sweet spot that they help improve that overall process?
So we use one of the three enzyme categories, the amyloglucosidase, and we use it in our light lager. What's really interesting is that we started at about the middle of the range in terms of the dosing process, or the dosing rate, I should say. We were about 650 mils per ton, with the range is recommended, anywhere from Ashton correcting maybe 250 to 1200 ppm. So we're about smack dab in the middle there. We started developing an all malt, interestingly enough, light lager in 2023, where we were trying to develop a beer at 4% that still drank like, it had a kind of a craft soul to it, for, the New England, Pilsner consumer, something that still had some body, still had some flavor to it. Our pilots were interesting. We ran, it's an all malt beer. It's got actually 15% Vienna in it. If you can imagine that. We ran 3 pilots and we kept coming short on our RDFs. We were looking for about 66%, with a relatively high finishing gravity. That's one of the other unique things about this beer. It finishes at about 1.8 Plato. Those early pilots, we were coming in at 61.5% RDF. We're looking for 66. And so as soon as we added the Amylo 300, we saw that RDF shoot right up. And we were already doing a fairly aggressive step mash, and a fairly long mash. It's 55 minutes. We were splitting time between 140 and 149, and still falling short of our target. So this helped us get across the finish line relatively easily and painlessly. Since scaling it up, and since then, it's become a year-round beer for us. We've been able to dial that dosage rate back considerably, where we're actually below the recommended threshold ever so slightly. But we're still seeing complete fermentations. So it's a light beer that's got some dryness, some snappiness to it, but still some decent flavor. And this enzyme really, really made a big difference for us in getting there. So I'm a big fan.
Yeah. I remember, even on the other side of things, while it's most often associated with light beer, there are some very high gravity brewers making big stouts, but, also potentially, and, we're talking 15 to 20% ABV beers, and a little bit of that amyloglucosidase can certainly help some of these really challenging fermentations when you need yeast to go that far. I remember Avery here in Colorado that was their kind of secret for making these just super ultra high gravity beers. But not such a popular aspect of the craft beer world as much anymore. Sam, how do these enzymes work their way into your mash process? And are there any that you favor for what you all brew?
Oh my God, Ashton, do you remember this email thread back and forth you had probably like 4 or 5 years ago about this?
I think so.
No.
Yeah.
No, the look on your face said that you don't remember. That's okay. All right. So, Steve, exactly what you are doing, we tried to do when we were on a much smaller scale. And I emailed Ashton about it. I'm like, listen, we're using amyloglucosidase is not doing it for us. What's wrong? Ashton sent a really awesome long email explaining how it works and how our percentages, or sorry, our dosage rate was super low. We tried going higher, it wasn't working. We kind of gave up on it a little bit, and we were hitting our light lager, I think, is designed a little bit different than yours, Steve. So I think it's apples to oranges, not apples to apples here. We were targeting 1, and we just were really struggling to get below like 1.5, 1.6. And a couple of years later, we end up moving to this bigger brew house, and everything just fell into line. And we weren't even using the enzyme. We started hitting 1.0. I know I sound like I'm talking people out of using enzymes, but I think Steve just proved that that's not the case. It does work for some people. And on this bigger brew house, we just started hitting 1. So Ashton, thank you for all of your wonderful input on that email thread, but it sort of took care of itself without the enzyme. And then,
You're right, Sam. I don't remember that. So glad it worked out.
Yeah. And then, we ended up winning it, World Beer Cup and GABF this year for that beer. So thanks for all your help over the years on American Light Lager.
That's what we like to hear.
What should we talk about next? Should we stay on the enzyme topic and move into, or are there any other kinds of ins and outs of how you use these enzymes on the mash side that you want to talk about or explain, Ashton? Are there any other kinds of use cases that you see brewers using these, that make some sense out there?
There are two, and I'm just kind of curious if Steve or Sam, if you use, do either of you use a beta glucanase type enzyme?
No.
We don't.
I'm hoping this is not a long term thing, but we sell a lot of rice hulls at RBSG, and we sell rice hulls to brewers that are using flaked adjuncts. And like a lot of, I'm going to call them waste stream products, and rice hulls are kind of a waste stream of rice processing. These products are, once they find an application, sometimes there's like an unexpected rise in demand. So we have found that the rice hulls are actually right now, there's kind of a supply chain issue where the demand is maybe pushing the supply side a little bit. So brewers are coming to us and asking other things they could be using instead of rice hulls. And beta glucanase enzymes are one such enzyme. So we have a product called bioglucanase that I know that we have some customers that have replaced rice hulls with that type of enzyme to do to the mash what rice hulls do. It's basically reduce wort viscosity. There's another enzyme that's new on the market that we literally just launched, and the enzyme is a glucose oxidase enzyme, and it's the trade name is called Tastezyme G, and it's really focused for non-alcoholic beer, low alcohol beer. And what it does is it takes glucose, it's present in the wort, and it converts the glucose to gluconic acid, which has a mouthfeel effect. And if you're using a maltose negative yeast, it's removing some of the glucose that maltose negative yeast would convert into alcohol. So it's a brand new enzyme, new application, and it's showing a lot of promise. It actually improves the flavor stability of NAs. It takes away some of that wordy character, but it's a pretty cool enzyme. We're hoping that breweries find useful.
Interesting.
Quick question there for Ashton on supplementing rice hulls with some of the cellulose enzymes. In 2021, I'm pretty sure, was it that we had a really rough crop year? In North American crop in particular was tough. Did you have a lot of customers or find people were using some of those enzymes just to help with wort separation?
Yeah, that's a great point, Steve, and I appreciate you reminding me that's the other key application. Maltsters, we try to forget about this horrible barley crop years, but when Mother Nature gets angry and gives us, malt or barley that makes malting difficult, those types of cellulase enzymes definitely do have a very good use in the mash. And I remember when I was a young brewer back in I think like 1998 or 1999, there was another barley crop that was particularly kind of rough, and that there was another kind of run on those types of enzymes. So yeah, a good point.
Well, now that we've talked about hot side enzymes, let's talk about some of the cold side enzymes. I think one of the most popular today amongst West Coast IPA brewers in particular is ALDC, and controlling hop creep and making sure that we keep VDK low and finished beer, super important. And so why don't you explain a little bit, Ashton, what some of these cold side enzymes are, what ALDC is, what the kind of pathway of function they have, and then we can we'll talk to Sam first about how they use it in the brewery, because it's kind of become an important piece of IPA brewing these days.
Yeah, ALDC in a nutshell, it takes the precursor of diacetyl, the alpha-ketolactate that's excreted from the yeast cell, and the enzyme takes the diacetyl precursor, alpha-ketolactate, and it takes it straight to acetylene. So that's kind of a flavor neutral compound. It does that outside of the cell, so it's a rapid process. So basically, if you're measuring diacetyl, there's never a spike. So the ALDC is typically added with yeast. When you pitch your yeast, you would add ALDC. And if you're dry hopping, a lot of times a second dose of ALDC would be added about the same time as you would dry hop to help combat the hop creep. So that's an enzyme that's definitely popular with ale brewers, and then also lager brewers that might have some issues with diacetyl. One real quick point before you turn to Sam and Steve is that if you have diacetyl in your beer, it does not fix problems that are existing. So if you realize you've got a D-bomb on your hands, you can't add this enzyme to it and fix it, because the mechanism of action is that it does its thing before diacetyl forms.
So you still need a good hot side process and not.
Well, it's kind of like wearing a seatbelt. If you get in a car accident and you put your seatbelt afterwards, it doesn't really help anything. So you got to have your ALDC buckled up before, you got the diacetyl problem.
Sure. So in a practical sense then, Sam, how do you work ALDC into your practice, particularly around West Coast IPA? Because if you can prevent the diacetyl precursor from forming, then you don't end up with this additional diacetyl from additional fermentation while dry hopping. Talk about how that works in the brewery.
Yeah, our process is pretty simple. I know several brewers who do things very differently to a lot of success. So I don't know, maybe we need to reevaluate what we're doing to have even more success. But we really just add a sort of mid-level rate at dry hop, go through our re-fermentation, and then rarely do we have a forced diacetyl test that fails. Pretty simple. But I do want to put a plug in for using it in lagers as well. I mean, we use it in our pills and our clubhouse lager, and the reasoning behind that is to sort of get into the step crash process and get a couple extra cold days in FE that we normally wouldn't get. So it's not just in our West Coast and American IPAs; it's also in all of our lager beers.
So you're saying that those lagers then also will clear VDKs faster and allow you to get them into lagering sooner and give you more days of lagering because of that?
Yeah. We ferment pretty cold too. We knock out at 46F, ferment at 48, never rise, use a fairly low level of ALDC, and then I can't remember the last time you failed a lager forced diacetyl test.
Steve, how's that? Does ALDC find its way into some of the beers that you all make?
So echoing what Sam was saying about lagers, we use them in all of our lagers. It's interesting how it actually came about. We had maybe about 5 years ago, a little bit less, one of our lab technicians took over our sensory program. And she just took it to the next level. She rounded up a couple folks, and herself included, that were particularly sensitive to diacetyl. And, she was managing the forced diacetyl test that we were doing in the lab. They would say go, no go for chilling. And because of their sensitivity, and I can appreciate it because I'm not, so acutely sensitive, our DRS windows just kept extending. So, we were historically had been chilling before we had this sort of sensory validation, day 11 maybe, and that was getting pushed out day 14, day 16 at some points. And while there was a good thing on the diacetyl side of things, we were sacrificing cold conditioning time, and we were picking up some other off flavors. I mean, mostly lysis, associated flavors. So we needed to figure out a solution that would both manage BDKs, but also get us, crashing as soon as we could. So we use it in all of our lager. We're up at about 34 ppm, so a little bit on the higher side there. Although recently we rolled that back to about 25 ppm. We also ferment pretty cold, but we do a derest. So we're fermenting at 49. We'll raise up to 56, and we'll get to the mid 50s for that rest. But we're chilling sometimes as early as day 9. So we're recovering on average, I'd say about 5 days worth of cold conditioning. We're getting our yeast off the beer sooner. And we're just enjoying all the benefits of that extended cold conditioning for the beer too. I guess one thing that I should add is that we have yet to cut down our cycle time for the beer in total, despite the fact that we are realizing, an extra 5 or so days. Our German Pilsner is one of our flagships, and it's a bit of a sacred cow around here. So I'm not sure if I told anyone that, hey, this is going to be great savings for tank capacity and cooling costs, et cetera, that anybody would even enjoy the idea that we were shortening the green state cycle time. So we're realizing the benefits on a sensory level right now rather than on an economic level, but we'll see what the future holds there.
I mean, making better beer that way is it's never a bad thing either. Any other cold side enzymes that we need to talk about, or should we talk about cold side findings and tank findings now, Ashton?
Well, there's the one cold side enzyme that a lot of brewers use, some brewers don't, but I think it's kind of a big one is brewer's Clarix, also called Clarity Firm. And just in a nutshell, that enzyme is basically it goes after Hayes protein. So it specifically attacks long chains of proline amino acids. So there's the Hayes proteins tend to be proline rich, and that particular enzyme goes and it whacks up these proline moieties within a protein, and that change in the protein structure helps stabilize the beer. Helps prevent chill haze. So that is very, very effective in chill haze prevention. And then the other application that the Clarix has is that because that type of protein is problematic with people with celiac disease, it helps reduce gluten. And that's a whole nother topic. There's a lot of definitions with that. But anyhow, I think that's an enzyme worth mentioning.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's obviously I've got a son who's celiac, and I care about these kinds of issues. The most interesting use that I've seen with Clarax, that enzyme, is even in hazy IPA brewers who are still using that enzyme to drop these larger proteins out of solution to maintain haze stability rather than to remove all haze, because as we all know, the smaller those protein polyphenol complexes are, they're producing stable haze. The smaller those are, then the longer they will last and stay in solution rather than coming out of solution. Steve, you guys have worked on some haze stability up there. You're in the Vermont hazy IPA Central. How does that work into your process?
Sure are. We've actually used it. We use it in lager, just to manage chill haze. At a fairly modest rate. We use it in our hop forward beers, and it was actually a solution to canned product snow globing that we saw in our hop forward products. We had this one double IPA that we make regularly, and kind of out of nowhere, canned products. So those oxidized polyphenols were binding in cold stored cans. And we were just seeing the snow globing effect. You'd pour the thing out and it was just brutal in a pint glass. And Clarix was a silver bullet for us there. And then for a long time, we made a gluten reduced beer as well. So we were using the enzyme in the more aggressive end of the dosing rate to reduce gluten for people with celiac.
Unlike that other brewery in Vermont, you can't just say drink from the can, so you don't have to see that snow globe effect.
We're not so lucky. No, we're not so lucky.
Right. Sure.
That's marketing brilliance right there.
Hey, turn a weakness into a strength. That's it's fantastic. Anything else about Clarix, and then we can move on to some other cold side findings. All right. Well, then let's move on to cold side findings. Why don't you give us a little bit of an overview, Ashton?
Well, an overview is kind of a historical thing, which I love talking about. So, at some time a brewer figured out if you chucked the fish into a beer, it clarified it. And then that, of course, ushered in the use of isinglass wines, which I still wonder who was the first brewer to chuck a fish into a cask of ale. And it worked, but the problem with isinglass is not that it doesn't work. It's probably the most effective finding out there. But the whole, the vegan question always comes up. So people got tired of talking about, well, isinglass doesn't really survive in the beer, yada, yada, yada. So products like Biofine Clear, which is polysilicic acid, have become really, really popular. They essentially replace findings like isinglass. And we have a lot of customers that essentially use that type of finding as the exclusive way of clarifying. So that is one compound. But as Steve mentioned earlier, there's some brewers that don't like silica products in beer, and that is a polysilicic acid. Is what Biofine Clear and other light products are. So there's other options out there right now. There's products from mushrooms, like Kyber or chitosan from mushrooms can be used to clarify. So chitin product or chitosan products, a lot of times people think they're from shellfish, which they are, but there's also fungal derived chitin that can be used as a clarifier. So those are to me, those are the main clarifiers. You can use collagen from eggs or cows or fish, but because of the vegan concerns, those products are not as popular as they once were.
Sam, how do tank findings work their way into your process, and how have you found those to improve the overall production?
And Ashton just proved you can put anything in beer, right? What was that? Eggs, cows,
mushrooms, fishes, Yeah.
Doesn't matter. It's probably got some application. Yeah, we've used Biofine Clear for quite a while. Had some very, I think it's always been very easy to use, good success. Not really complicated. Normally add it, cold in the fermenter, transfer off. Always had great success. I honestly not much to add there. We've used it in pretty much everything. I can't really think of a beer that we would not. Yeah, a lot of ums there. Not much to add.
Cool. Steve, how about you?
Yeah, I would echo that. We used it in pretty much everything up until the point we got a centrifuge, and it was probably 2017, 18, something like that. We began separating most of our beers, but we still do use it on our 5-barrel R&D system for pretty much everything. Super easy to use. You can vary your dose rate depending on how clear or what your inputs are. It's all reliable.
Yeah. Good stuff. All right, Ashton, we've been talking for a while here. We kind of need to pull it all together. Are there any of these other process aids that you think we should highlight, before we wrap things up?
We covered a lot, we covered a lot of material, and we're trying to think if there's any other process aids out there that we really want to hit on, but no, I think we got it.
So, Ashton, in addition to some of the, kind of functional and, clarifying and, wort improvement and finished beer improvements that come along for these process aids, there are also some additional benefits that brewers can count on that, one of the biggest things that we all face as brewers, again, not a sexy subject, but wastewater is, and creating waste through brewery processes is one that can be very expensive for brewers, depending on what their local wastewater facility is. But there is not a local wastewater facility that likes taking waste from breweries with a high amount of effluent in it. Everyone, you're going to need to meet certain lower limits in order to be able to, push any wastewater out of a brewery into that kind of municipal water treatment system. And so some of these aids that we're talking about have some additional environmental benefit, and that they can reduce reduce the amount of in suspension effluent that's in this kind of wastewater. Talk a little bit about how that can improve that environmental performance for a brewery.
Yeah, I love that question, Jamie. If you close your eyes and visualize the process and think about the flow of raw materials, so malt, hops, yeast, water, from where they're added to beer, anytime there's a shoot off at an arrow off that stream that goes to drain, let's think about those arrows that go to drain. So in the brew house, we have lauter ton liquid that would go down the drain. There's extract in that. So that's a rich source of effluent. If we could prevent that from going down the drain and put it in the brew kettle, we want to do that. So with the example of cellulase enzymes like biglucanase, that enzyme helps prevent sloppy, wet grain and allows more of that liquid to be diverted to the brew kettle and less of it is kind of going down the drain. If we talk about the use of kettle findings, one advantage to kettle finding when they're properly optimized is compact trube. And if we have compact trube, again, we're getting as much work out of the trube into the fermenter as possible, minimize the amount of work, which is a very, very high BOD waste stream from going down the drain. And then our whirlpool bottoms, well, those bottoms could be diverted, side streamed, and put into our spent grain. If we go into the fermenter, there's two main waste streams that come out of the fermenter. There's beer foam off the top of the fermenter, which had ethanol, it had extract, and it has yeast. That's suspended solids, BOD, and ethanol. All bad. So if we use an anti-foam, we can help prevent foam overs. And then if we look at the tank bottom, if we have compact removal of solids, especially with what Steve was talking about with the separator, if we can get as much of the beer off the fermenter as possible and really concentrate our solids into our separator, or if we don't use separator or filtration, as much of that heavy solid as let's say beer-free sediment as possible, then that's an advantage. And I think that would be the theme if I were looking to minimize my effluent streams. That's how I would kind of visualize that flow of keeping as much of that liquid as we can in the beer as we possibly can. And these process aids help minimize those losses.
Steve, so you've got something now that's both good for efficiency in terms of having more liquid and that's not leaving with some of your byproducts, but you're also creating less rich waste in the process. And Vermont's a state that definitely cares about clean water and taking care of everything. How do some of these process agents find their way into your overall environmental responsibility plan?
Yeah, I mean, Aston kind of outlined it. You just sort of summed it up really, really nicely. I mean, I think wastewater is a hot button issue for breweries everywhere. We definitely feel the constraints and try to reduce, our high strength waste as much as we can, and limiting what's in the effluent means that we're keeping more beer in the tanks, and we're keeping our beer at a higher quality and consistency standard. The cold side anti-foam, which I didn't elaborate on earlier, that we use, it makes tanks a little bit bigger. So not only are we keeping some of those foam positive proteins in place, we're keeping those isos in the tank. We're also just retaining better yeast quality. The yeast that we want to keep stays in the tank. So it's really interesting when you dig into some of the benefits of these enzymes, because it turns out what is an environmentally friendly practice can also make better and more consistent beer. So we don't fear the enzymes conceptually, and aren't certainly caught up in the artistry of it all and think that it might take away from that. We very much so embrace it. And in fact, after this conversation, I got some more research to do to figure out how many more enzymes we need to embrace around here. So.
Oh my goodness, Sam, how do these process aids impact your approach to efficiency? That's certainly a value that you all ascribe to in terms of environmental responsibility and efficiency.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, for us right now, a couple of things. I guess inputs, right? We want to make sure that we're getting a higher percentage of our inputs, into the finished product. If we're lagging on brewhouse efficiency because we're making mistakes with either, kettle findings, gelatin, or, whirlpool speeds, dialing that in ends up being more environmentally friendly because we're getting more out of the product, right? We don't have to bump up those inputs to get the same amount of finished product to sweetener. That's number one. Number two, with, along with Steve, I think I've got some homework to do, especially about effluent. We're a growing company working with our environmental services right now on, getting better about all that. So yeah, I don't know, maybe probably had more questions for Ashton and check into some of these products that might help us out there.
Well, it sounds like we'll just have to do a follow-up next year, the year after, and see what else works its way into your process. Any final words for everybody, Ashton, in terms of for brewers that are looking at how to get a start in working some of these process aids into their production process, or dialing them in, honing in some of their function?
Well, to kind of piggyback off what Steve said, that the use of these process aids doesn't sacrifice the artistry of brewing. It's not a bad thing, and I think for the longest time, brewers had a skeptical eye on some of these products. But I think the way, if you're not currently using process aids, is to ask yourself the question: Are there things in your brewery that you would like to maybe improve upon, with efficiency or ease of use or aging times or whatever? And just consider one of these to give it a try and to see if it's for you. If you don't like it, then that's fine. You can go back to brewing beer the way you've been doing it. But I really think they are the kind of products that shouldn't be feared, and I think we should embrace new technologies, as the economics of brewing are not going to get any better. I mean, this costs are rising, and I think it would be really nice if we could continue brewing beer that normal people can afford to consume. And I think that process aids are one way to help keep our cogs in check.
And in this sense, you're talking about competing values often, where some of these process aids, you can value doing it the old-fashioned way, but you can also value producing less waste and being more efficient about energy usage, about the capital investment, and less manufacturing, lowering your carbon footprint. These are different kinds of values that all need to be weighed into the overall kind of picture as people are making decisions around these. And sometimes this is the old-fashioned way, is maybe, it's not the only value that can be pushed to the foreground as brewers are thinking about these things. And then a simple one, reducing wasted output is just a key one, not just for what it means for the financial bottom line for the brewery, but also what it means environmentally speaking, and and for everything else. And so sometimes what's good for the financial bottom line is also good for the environmental bottom line, and it's also good for consumers who can drink that and potentially get it at either a better price or at a more attractive margin for that business that allows you to take care of your people and all the other things that come from making a reasonable profit on the beer that you brew. And anyway, I think that's a great place to bring this to a close. Thank you to RAR BSG for allowing us to bring you this conversation interruption-free. Steve Theoritis, Sam Pecoraro, Ashton Lewis, thank you all for having this discussion with me, with sharing your perspectives out there with all of our listeners. It's been fascinating, and I've learned a lot, and I think all of us are going to go back to the drawing board and do a little bit more study, huh?
Thank you, Jamie. Great discussion, Steve and Sam.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jamie, for having me. Ashton, Sam, thanks so much for your time.
Yeah, thanks, everybody.
Great. Cheers. This podcast has been brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, for those who love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.